Hello and welcome to My Bold EUV. I'm Jim. It's about right here that I would normally say, and we're going from point A to point B. Climb in, let's go. But not today. I've actually debated for about a week on whether to finish this video or not, because it's going to be very controversial and very long. And I'm just going to do it. I'm not really concerned about whether I alienate people or not. I'm just going to bring some factual evidence to the forefront of the discussion. And you're free to do with that information what you want to do. Today we're going to talk about why the fossil fuel industry is literally destroying the world and why most people just don't care. And I know that's a bold statement, but it's one that we're going to prove. It's completely provable. It is a fact that everyone should take the time to investigate for themselves. It's something that we should actually look to those who serve us, the citizens, to put a stop to. But don't hold your breath. They're not going to do it. This is not a political talking point either. This has nothing to do with conservative or liberal. It has nothing to do with Democrat or Republican. This is an indictment of all citizens of the United States. Dare I say it's an indictment of all citizens of the world. The fact of the matter is, Democrats and Republicans have all been co-opted by the big oil industry. That's just a fact. Doesn't matter whether you're talking about Bush or Obama, Trump or Biden, or whoever else happens to sit in the Oval Office at the time. All presidents and most of Congress have succumbed to the power of the big oil lobby, period. There's tons of evidence to support this truth. And the only thing I'm going to do in this video is link to that evidence below in the description. Last year, 2023, the fossil fuel industry spent about $7 trillion worldwide on lobbying virtually every government on Earth. These monies came from giants like Exxon, Mobil, BP, many of the OPEC nations. In the USA alone, almost $1 trillion was spent directly and indirectly through lobbyists and front groups posing as environmental groups. The fossil fuel industry is insidious in their efforts to sway public opinion, to influence politicians through both direct and indirect contributions, to control the social media narrative, to win the hearts and the minds of the masses, you and I, who live, eat, and breathe what they see on the various media platforms, both big and small screen. Especially those little things we call cell phones. Last year, the amount spent by every environmental lobbying group was a measly $50 million. Now, I'm not a rocket scientist, but let's compare 1 trillion to 50 million. That means that 0.01% of all the lobbying done in our Congress last year was done by environmental groups, while big oil and their fellow fossil fuel cartels spent 99.99% of the lobbying money spent influencing energy issues in the United States of America. And the sheeple, some of them friends and family, just sit there like bumps on a log, parroting the information they find on the internet, pretending to be intellectuals and concerned citizens. Not one of them have looked at the real measurable data that we're about to look at. And if you want to better understand the big energy companies of this world and how they influence everything in your life, I would ask you to take the time, 3 to 4 hours, to look at the expose that was put out by Frontline. They put together a damning 3-part series called The Power of Big Oil. Part 1 covers the denial of big oil. They talk about how oil came in and denied that they have anything to do with the changes that we're seeing in our environment. And part 2 covers the doubt. And we've talked about fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And FUD is their #1 modus operandi. And then part 3 covers the delay. They want everybody to adopt. Well, let's wait and see. We don't know what's happening out there. We've only got just a few years worth of data. Big energy uses fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Again, FUD. It's their #1 modus operandi. Their second MO is to control the purse strings of every single political group in the world, but mostly here in the USA, because of the influence that the USA has on the rest of the world. Big energy cartels can no longer deny the influence their product has on our atmosphere, on our world, on our environment. In fact, their own internal studies prove that they've known about the impending disasters since the 1970s. And I'll provide a link to all my data sources in the description below this video. But for now, let's sit back and look at the factual evidence. Joe Friday kind of stuff. Just the facts, ma'am. I'm not going to sit here and fill you full of fantasy. I'm going to give you provable, measured, factual information. And then you can do with it what you want to do. So here we go. Okay, so now that we've got that out of the way, let's actually take a look at some of the measured atmospheric data from the past few years. Let's just look at one simple atmospheric change that is measurable and it's undeniable. Carbon dioxide, CO2. Since 1960, we have measured daily in one place on Earth carbon dioxide, and it's slap dab in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and it's on the Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii. So we have 64 years worth of really good measured data. CO2 has increased year over year, and the amount of increase has actually accelerated since 1990. So let's just take a quick look at the Mauna Loa Observatory increases in parts per million of CO2. Now let's take a look at natural gas, that is methane. Natural gas was touted in the early 2000s as a great replacement for coal-fired plants. Burning natural gas literally produces 1/2 the CO2 emissions of coal for the same amount of power generated. On paper, that looks really good until you dig into the production practices for obtaining the natural gas, especially that which we use today. During the George W. Bush administration, fracking came into its own. We're now able to frack billions of cubic meters of natural gas from the shale that underpins vast areas of our nation. Again, this discovery or this acceleration came while George W. Bush was in office. And by the time Obama took office in 2008, fracking had been perfected. During one of his State of the Union addresses, Obama actually made the braggadocious claim that we have enough natural gas to power our nation for the next 100 years. He said that in the State of the Union. While that may be true, the actual costs to our atmosphere are well known, and they're covered up like a Watergate tape in the Nixon White House. The capturing of natural gas from fracked wells comes with some serious consequences. Again, natural gas is methane. And since the introduction of widespread fracking in the USA and Canada to increase the availability of natural gas to feed the insatiable demand for electricity, the percentage of methane in our atmosphere has also spiked. Methane levels had leveled out in the late 1990s and were trending down until fracking started. And since 2008, the levels have increased 180 parts per billion in 16 years. And from 1984 to 2008, a period of 24 years, they'd only increased 140 parts per billion. So now you see there's an increase, there's an acceleration. Methane is a serious greenhouse gas. The levels we're seeing today are higher than they've been measured since the year 1000 using the ice core data. Take again a look at the levels since 1990. And also the levels since the year 1000. From the second CH4 trend line, it is easy to see that there's been another spike in methane since the advent of fracking. The numbers speak for themselves. They're factual, they're actual Joe Friday kind of stuff. But the fix for this increase is easy. It's called plumbing. If these wells and refining facilities were plumbed properly, this spike would literally go away overnight, and the trend line might actually reverse. But no government anywhere in the world, including the USA, is holding the gas and oil industry accountable because they've lobbied organizations like the EPA to keep the methane emission standards so high that the levels that we currently see in our atmosphere are meaningless. Gas refineries can easily and freely release 5,000 parts per billion with impunity, and they do. Methane is a much more insidious greenhouse gas than CO2. In lower concentration, it plays a much bigger role in climate change than CO2 ever will, and it's real. And now you have two pieces of data to show how the fossil fuel industry is affecting our atmosphere: CO2 and CH4, carbon dioxide and methane. And these are just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to polluting our atmosphere and our world. Nitric oxide, N2O, is essential for life, and our bodies actually produce all that we need to sustain our lives. However, all good things in high doses can be dangerous. N2O is also known as nitrous. It's laughing gas, but like carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide, it can cause hypoxia. There are also long-term health effects related to the long-term exposure of nitrous oxide. So let's take a look at the N2O spike since the advent of the industrial age. Going from about 270 parts per billion in the early 1800s to now we're up over 330 billion, almost 340 billion parts per million. And it's just continuing to increase. Now, as these gases take oxygen from the atmosphere, global O2 levels have been steadily decreasing since 1990. When any chemical process that needs O2, it takes that O2 from our breathable air, and the trees and the oceans cannot keep up with the demand to replace this O2. Take a look at the global O2 levels as they've changed since 1990. Steady downward. And let's talk about the other changes to our climate and biodomes, both air, sea, and land, from other chemicals. What about all the fallout of other chemicals? Those are getting into our soil and water systems. They're in our food and they're in our drinking water. Coral reef die-off around the world has doubled in the past 40 years. In fact, it's tripled. And no time in recorded history have the coral reefs around the world been so decimated like they are and have been since 1970. When I visited the Florida Keys in 1978 as part of a school trip, you could snorkel off almost any key along the highway and see the most pristine sea life available within the international waters of the United States of America. Today, in 2024, more than 90% of the coral reefs in and around the Florida Keys are dead or dying. The Great Barrier Reef near Australia is dying so fast science cannot keep up and make measurements or predictions as to how fast the die-off will be complete. And here are just a few reasons why. When you're refueling your car, you're actually releasing benzene. Long-term exposure to benzene can cause harmful effects to human bone marrow and can cause decrease in red blood cells, leading to anemia. We know this. It can also cause excessive bleeding and can affect the immune system, increasing the chances for infection in humans. It also makes its way into our waters and it kills sea life. Now we've talked about CO2, carbon dioxide, NH4 methane, N2O nitrous, but when you burn carbon-based fuels, not only are you spewing out those emissions, but you're also spewing out chemicals like carbon monoxide, sulfur, nitrogen dioxide, volatile organic compounds known as VOCs, hydrocarbons, and ammonia. Now let's talk a little bit more about some of the measured data that we can see in our observations, weather and sea observations around the world. Sea levels have increased almost 10 inches and they've been measured daily since 1890, period. These are actual measurements, not forecast models. Take a look at the data. This is measured data. Let's also talk about temperature, because the global average temperature has increased. Now, I've looked at this data in great detail, and at first I too was skeptical. So I went back and looked at several specific observing stations around the United States and tried to see if they were influenced by the heat island around them. You know, as cities grow around these observation stations, you're going to get a heat island effect. And I found a few that have not been influenced by these heat islands, and I checked their temperatures, and they have, each one of these, increased steadily. The mean global temperature has increased by almost 1.5 degrees Celsius since the mid-1980s. That's almost 3 degrees Fahrenheit. That's fairly significant. Now the real question is, can you prove mankind is responsible for these changes? Well, when we look at just one gas, CO2, and we tie it to the Industrial Revolution, the insatiable drive for fossil fuel-powered electricity, and the internal combustion engine, if you take a look at just this data and still have a doubt, then I'm afraid humanity is lost because of its own stupidity. Let's look at the graph showing the number of cars in the world from 1960 to 2022. It is simple to read and easy to understand. We've gone from less than 200 million cars in 1960 to over 1.5 billion today. And now look again at the CO2 data from the Mauna Loa Observatory, 1960 to today. Now let's take a look at these two graphs overlaid with each other. I think it's pretty simple to see the trend is upward. It is with great certainty that most of the increase in CO2 for our planet can be directly attributed to the internal combustion engine. The average energy efficiency rating for all cars in the USA is only 25 miles per gallon, and the average energy efficient for all trucks is 16 miles per gallon, and the average number of miles driven for both is 15,000 miles annually. Now, let's do the basic math. There are 283.4 million vehicles registered in the USA, and if we take away all the battery electric vehicles, that number is still over 280 million. And of the 280 million, 16.7% are trucks. This means the USA alone is responsible for a 0.82% increase in the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere each year from burning gas and diesel in our cars and trucks. We add more than 18 billion tons of CO2 to the atmosphere each year just with the internal combustion engine. If there were no more additions of CO2 to the atmosphere other than USA burning gas and vehicles, within 200 years, our atmosphere would be 0.15% CO2, a level that is not compatible with healthy and sustainable human life. The fact is, the entire world emissions of CO2, carbon dioxide, will get us to that level within the next 50 years, and possibly even the next 30 years if we keep going at the rate we're going now. And that's primarily because the CO2 emissions from China are twice that of the USA due to their industrial plants. One only need to add a trend line to the Mauna Loa Observatory to reach this conclusion. This single atmospheric gas should be enough reason for us to put on our brakes in the consumption of fossil fuel. Let's take another look at some of the environmental damage we've done to our planet just since 1967. Since 1967, our planet has been assaulted with oil spills. Do you remember the Exxon Valdez oil spill in Prince William Sound on the coast of Alaska in 1989? Do you remember the images of the birds soaked in oil? The thousands of animals that were dead laying on the beaches? The suffocation of sea life in the area? Or the years that it took to clean up the mess? Well, the Exxon Valdez was only 11 million gallons, and it is classified as only the 14th worst oil spill in history in terms of gallons spilled. Take a look at this list. Most of these spills you've probably never heard of because of the power of big oil to suppress their recklessness from the press. But here are a few stats that they cannot hide. Since 1967, big oil companies have dumped 1,464,000,000 gallons of oil into our land and sea environments, mostly the sea. This is equivalent to 133 Exxon Valdez-sized oil spills. Averaged out over the years, it is equivalent to putting 2.4 Exxon Valdez spills into our oceans each year. In 1989, it cost them $2 billion to clean it up and $1.8 billion to restore it. That $3.8 billion in 1989 is about 9.5 billion today. And multiply that by 133, and you can see that we've spent well over $1 trillion to clean up oil spills since 1967. Well, it's right about now I'm hearing somebody scream, hey, we're never going to get rid of oil and fossil fuels. We got to have those to keep civilization running. Well, we can do it, and we're going to talk about that. Number one, the replacement to coal, oil, and gas for electricity. The first thing you do is you replace your internal combustion engine car with an EV. We have the technology to make that happen in 5 years or less, period. I don't want to hear any arguments about it. The technology is there, and so are the resources. And we can replace virtually all carbon-based electrical generation with solar and wind and battery. And the key here is the battery. And we can do that within 10 years. Again, we have the technology to make that happen today, period. Now, we all know the story of Tesla. We all know that most car makers can now make EVs, and we have the technology and the raw materials to start making more battery electric vehicles. There's not one person with a working brain on earth that can deny that the electric vehicle is a superior vehicle, period. I know what happens when you need to charge your car and the power's out. What about the charging infrastructure? What about A or B or C? The naysayers are going to whine no matter what, but I can and I have proven over and over on my channel that EVs are here to stay and they're better for the planet. I'll no longer argue with anyone about this issue. If you want to make comments in the comments section below, feel free to, but I'm going to delete them because I'm not going to listen to the voice of idiots anymore. I'm done with that. Now, let's talk about the production of electricity. I have several friends, one of who worked at a coal-fired electrical plant, tell me that it is impossible to replace coal, oil, and gas and other fuels to power our electrical plants with wind, solar, and batteries. Well, again, I'm going to say my friend is just dead wrong, period. There are engineers who have designed SWB, solar, wind, and battery power plants that will provide power for anywhere on this planet, period. North Pole, South Pole, and everywhere in between. The funny thing about it, the design and implementation of SWB replacement for our current electrical grid would be the cheapest solution possible. It would be cheaper to replace everything we have on the grid today with solar, wind, and battery than it would be to continue to run everything with fossil fuels, coal and natural gas, and nuclear power for the next 10 years, period. The numbers do not lie, but the fossil fuel cartels do, provably. We've already talked about that. Also, there would be no need to replace our current electrical transmission lines or substations. We simply have to replace the source of the electrical power generation. And as an example, for Texas, it would cost between $197 and $239 billion to replace their entire electrical grid, and amortized over 10 years, the cost would be much cheaper than the current cost to generate power in Texas using all the things they're using to generate power with today: natural gas, coal, and nuclear. Today, Texas generates about 39.1 billion kilowatt hours of electricity at a cost of more than $25 billion per year. Now, at the end of 10 years, the SWB power plant's basically going to be free. And yes, you heard me correct. It would basically be free. The only cost associated with SWB after the 10-year investment would be the maintenance cost. With fossil fuels, there's always an increase in the cost of operation year after year because the price of fuels are always going to increase. And the same is true for nuclear. Right now, there's some brainwashed maniacal fool on the fossil fuel side of the equation shouting at their screen saying, "What about the Texas blackouts back in the winter of 2021? Again, they're referring to the blackouts that occurred during the coldest Arctic outbreak in the history of Texas. The fossil fuel cartels immediately pointed to the wind and solar farms as the problem because they were not producing power at a rate high enough to meet demand. But if you remember, when I started this section, I mentioned SWB. The B part has not been fully implemented in Texas. Battery storage is key to making this work. Batteries would have solved the problem with room to spare if the electrical grid was configured according to the models outlined in Clean Disruption, a book by Tony Seba. You can go on YouTube anywhere and search for Tony Seba. You can go on Google and search for him, and you will find that his predictions about disruptions in transportation and energy are quickly taking place. And remember the 1.2 trillion spent on oil cleanups? Can you imagine how many SWB systems could have been installed for that much money, and what little impact those systems would have had on the environment? Finally, there are thousands of people who are living off grid right now. SWB standalone systems are taking place on the micro scale throughout the world on individual homes that have solar, wind, and battery solutions so they can live without connection to the electrical grid. The fossil fuel and electrical lobbies are so powerful here in the United States that they've made it illegal to do this in 45 of 50 states. There are only 5 states where you can legally live completely off grid. Those states are Alabama, Missouri, Georgia, Tennessee, and Texas. All other states, including Florida, where I live, have a connection or a grid tie requirement or tax requirements that make it so expensive that living off grid would not be something you could afford. And that's pathetic. And that is the power of the fossil fuel cartels. We have a wonderful planet. In this video, I've provided several facts that are undeniable. No hullabaloo, no red herrings, just factual information. And this factual information is provided to all free-thinking people equally. First of all, I'm a scientist. You can look right over my shoulder here. I was certified as a weather forecaster back in the early 1990s. I have a degree in weather forecasting. I have advanced degrees in natural science and business, and I have for over a decade. I have been the part of 2 engineering companies and have worked directly with some of the smartest engineers in the radar industry and entertainment industry for more than 23 years. I'm a 20-year veteran of the United States Air Force. I'm a father, I'm a grandfather, I'm a husband, and I'm a friend to everyone. And I bear no ill will to any human being on this earth. I only seek to make things better. Know this, I do not hold such a staunch position on anything that I cannot be swayed with actual evidence and scientific fact. So again, I would ask you to keep that in mind when you make your comments regarding this video. If you go on the attack, you're just simply going to be blocked. And if you attack me personally, I will block you from this channel and I may report you to authorities. I'm just not going to put up with any nonsense over this issue. I am about open dialogue. Let's talk about this. But please refrain from hate, anger, foolishness, big oil talking points, FUD, and maligning. There's too much of that on our planet already, from both sides of the political spectrum and everywhere in between. So join me at the apex of the pyramid, and let's think about all of these things 3-dimensionally, left, right, up, down, X, Y, and Z axes. If you have factual evidence that you would like to present regarding the efficacy of fossil fuels, and it is provable, not emotional, then please do so. I'm into open dialogue. What I am not into are the emotionally challenged trolls and armchair warriors who think they're smart. I seek intelligent and provable dialogue. Let's just simply deal with the facts that I presented here. We can show a 1-for-1 correlation to the increase in fossil fuels to the increase in all the pollutants that are in our atmosphere, carbon-based and methane. I would like to thank you for stopping by, and I do appreciate your consideration on these issues. I only take these issues because I don't want my children and my grandchildren wasting their time and their treasure cleaning up a mess that we have given them. We need to grab that mop and bucket today and get about the business of cleaning things up. We know the truth. We know that fossil fuels are killing our planet. We have the facts. I've shown you the measured data. Now, let's roll. Thanks again for stopping by. Please do remember to subscribe, share, comment, and like, and ring the notification bell if you want to know when I upload something new. Thanks again for stopping by, and I'll see you all again real soon. Take it easy, everybody.